for being here with us.
Hello, hola. It will be in English again. So, so just a little bit of my experience at Yara. It's been now 10 years since basically the program started in North America. And from day one, I was in our Tampa office helping it get off the ground. So my experiences are relatable from day one. All the challenges that we'll face here in Mexico, they may be different in some cases, but they will also be many of the same ones. And so I think we'll touch on a number of things. And some will be relatable, some will be you've heard before, but I think that's okay because repetition is good as far as education, I think, in the market. Just to give a flavor for the room, could I ask by show of hands, how many are distributors? Distributors? How many operate a fleet? Not too many. How many are producers? We have quite a few producers, and just other industry experts or players. Okay, so a relatively good mix, but it's interesting. I think some of these things will be relatable to everybody. So just a very quick introduction. We'll just go through an introduction of Yara, in case you don't know about us, market challenges that we can potentially expect in Mexico, not that we can foresee the future. Reliability of supply, handling the expected and the unexpected. Being in North America and working in US and Canada, every day there's both expected and unexpected challenges. Quality control throughout the supply chain, how do we reduce the risk? So just about Yara, we certainly are a global company with global impact. Over about 12,000 people employed across, we operate in 50 countries, but we sell to 150 countries. You can tell we're a fertilizer company, so we work a lot with farmers, of course, 15 million, and produce a lot of tons of grain and to feed the world. So our goal is to feed the world and clean up the air. And so you see we clean the air for over 50 million citizens and growing. So here's the snapshot on a map basis of our Yara global network, where you see we have both major plants and offices and sales across all of the world. Very heavily in Europe. We're based in Oslo, Norway, have a lot of production in Europe, and a lot of it's currently imported to Brazil, to US, and then of course, used in Europe. And just when we look at our, the different challenges, when we say emissions to air control, you've got a challenge of growing population. We need to, people are dying from these emissions. We need to clean it up. We're only more and more people, more and more vehicles. We're doing the best we can together, right? So our approach is to build technology solutions that help really get to the end game and to really benefit, or the results, as you can see there, I can barely see it myself, of the people that we've, helped in terms of air pollution control. So, and just about our AdBlue DEF production, we're the world's largest producer as far as production overall of this molecule. We have plants located across the globe. That helps the reliability, of course. And what was unique about Yara is we have large-scale, deep vessel shipments. So we bring in multiple products of chemical nature, fertilizer basis, others, that help us reduce our overall cost to service the markets by bringing in 18 to 35,000 ton vessels in different parts of the world. And we do offer complete solutions to help fleet operators, OEMs, and oil majors when you're talking about the products, to the equipment, et cetera. So what challenges might we expect here? Supply. Will there be enough? And will quality standards be met, kept, and who will provide accountability? Well, my short answer on supply, will there be enough, is yes, no, and yes. So let me explain. Or C, no, and C. Let me explain. Will there be enough? Ultimately, yes. Mexico will be very well supplied, even if today there is no domestic production. Why is that? Well, obviously, very close proximity to US, and many shipments are already coming in from US. Imports from other parts of the world are happening and will continue to happen, and it's easy to do with the port access on both the east and west coast of Mexico. And of course, when you have engine manufacturers involved and major diesel players involved, they are going to demand and make sure that there's enough diesel exhaust fluid to meet their customers' needs. will quality standards be met, kept? To be determined, right? I think people in this room, we understand, or we are understanding the needs on the water side. We heard from Jeff on where a lot of the issues, and that might be coming, I guess, Jeff, is that for a while there was just finished product. And now there's a lot of high concentrate product that's being diluted. So you have so much more opportunity for the deionized water to potentially, be involved in the system, which can certainly throw off the spec. Yeah. So yeah, to be determined who others are out there that are not in this room, that are not viable, that might try to do, we call it backyard blends, where they're putting in their bathtub and they're mixing it up with just the water that's coming out of the tap. These are the things that, as consumers and fleets, they're going to have to be really, really educated and also aware that those things will happen. So if the deal is too good to be true, maybe there's a reason. Distributor packaging. Oh, by the way, so the other point about supplying Mexico is the yes, no, yes. You may have certain shortages. It's so vast that some parts are going to be easier to supply than others when you look at the map. I kind of just did some regional viewpoints, and when you look at it, some parts certainly will be easier to supply than others. So in some cases, you might have shortages or not be as easily accessible to parts of Mexico. And if you know anything about how the rail coming into Mexico from U.S., there's been a lot of backups because it's been very new. So Laredo, Texas have had huge backups on supplying via rail, and that's because it's new business, plus there's diesel coming in now. So there's some challenges there, but ultimately, yes, Mexico is certainly going to be well supplied, but doesn't mean there won't be some short-term challenges. And of course, when we talked about confirming this is the next slide, but I'll just talk a little bit more about watch people who are taking shortcuts. Make sure you understand, if you're the consumer, or train your consumers to understand what their producer is doing on batch testing and how that procedure works. And of course, API is here and has told us about their programs that they will be implementing. Distribution and packaging. So just a random example, I'm sure a lot of us in the room will have something very similar. But there'll be very big stages of packaging, and I think you'll see all of them throughout the lifetime supply. We see that in U.S. today, even ones that are in bulk now, but there's some other small trucking companies that are just getting involved, and so they have small totes, they have drums, and many still have pallets of jugs sitting in their back floor as backup. They're in all the retail stations in U.S. still, because if bulk goes down or if there's a problem, they do have the small jug packaging. The other key challenge, though, for distribution, I think, that we've found is that it's very hard for the consumers to know what their rateability will be early on. If it's a XYZ bus company or fleet, they may or may not know, as sitting in Monterrey or in Puebla, how many trucks they're going to be receiving in of the new standard with the SCR, because their purchasing bodies of their company may or may not tell them. All of a sudden they might show up and there's 5 more trucks on their yard. So those are the challenges that we faced in U.S., where suddenly somebody's consumption went from here to here, and you had to find a way to make sure you got them on a ratable schedule for bulk deliveries or whatever. But ratability will not happen in the very beginning, so we all need to be prepared. Information education. I think that's some of the most important things when someone's going to choose their supplier, is can they answer some of the basic questions and then some of the hard questions. Some of them are just here, but also the questions are like, what have you seen before? How has this happened in the past? What does this mean if there's high sodium or high calcium? Or is this going to kill my catalyst? If the urea concentration is 33.3, is that a bad thing, or what is it doing? Well, not really. It's you just maybe burning a little more urea, or urea is going to be, you're wasting it, what you're sending them, right? But these are things that I think is important for us in the industry to be educated, share information, and the consumers are certainly going to demand it. Reliability of supply, size and scale is certainly important certainly in our eyes, because we know of the unexpected and unexpected things, as I talked about. Like fuel, these vehicles won't run without this product. Certainly, it's not as immediate if your fuel's out you can't run. It's a more of a degrading process, right, if you don't refill. So those things, but still, if you don't have this product, if it's not readily available, you'll have a challenge and your fleet will not be happy. And supply disruptions and shortages are inevitable, whether it's coming from US, whether it's coming from Europe, whether it's domestic production. So the key for a fleet, I think, is to understand what your supplier has as redundancy, backup, and emergency case scenarios. As I said, the demand rates will vary, so you really need to have a good plan yourself to be able to supply these customers, because the demand that they're going to put on you is going to be high, especially when it really starts ramping up in the next couple of years. I guess the other one point about that too is consumption percentage, and I think we had one of the, I think, Fabrizio, you had a little bit about the consumption percentage. I think in US now we average about 3%, but it's on the way up to 4%, and I think you've mentioned 5% with the no standard. Approximately, maybe, yeah. So that changes your rate, too, of how much the customers are going to need. So handling the unexpected, I talked a little bit about it. Trucks will operate, can't operate without it. They'll find alternatives if you can't supply them, of course. Supply disruptions are inevitable. And be prepared for quality questions, because that's probably the one that we get the most. My sensor on my truck is doing something wrong, and it says it's bad urea. And 9 times out of 10, the urea hasn't been bad. It's either been a sensor issue or whatever. Not to put down any Daimler or anybody that's in here that might be part of that. But that's what we found sometimes in the past. So quality control throughout the supply chain. They asked me just to talk a little about our experience, all the way from the packaging to the bulk and where the potential risks lie. So one thing that we like to say within Yara is, when you add DEF, add care. So yeah, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's also a key message that purity is essential, and it's important to talk to our customers about that purity. And we can do only so much, but then we're going to show examples of how really at the end of the supply chain, how they touch it, and there's people in this room that can help us with those situations. But what they do with it and how they handle it is also important. So it's important for us to give them solutions, not just the product solution, but solutions to keep the product clean, clear, and on spec. Just in general, DF is certainly safe. It's non-toxic, it's not flammable, it's stable, non-hazardous. So it's nice that way for us, producing it, shipping it, et cetera. But you have to worry sometimes about temperature. And in Mexico, that might be a concern about the heat and having it maybe under protected areas so that the heat is not beating down on your tote. That's certainly a key. Now, it takes months that would happen, but still it's something important for Mexico. DF has slightly alkalinity, pH of approximately 9, but other than that, I mean, it's certainly a safe product. Okay, so there's multiple contamination risks in our DF supply infrastructure and supply chain, coming all the way, let's see. So certainly we start here, and you move either into storage tanks or intermediate storage tanks. I guess for our experiences, some of the biggest risk, as I talked about, is maybe down here when you're handling small packs and other bulk or mini bulks and things, only because those people a lot of them are used to handling diesel or handling lubricants. And if they do any cross-contamination from the gloves they use, from the hoses they use, I mean, these things that we found have been the biggest challenge as far as discoloration or finding oil in the product. A lot of times it's just the handling on the bottom end, especially when you get into drums and totes. But certainly anywhere in the chain, there's a possibility of contamination risk. So having a good supplier from the day one who knows how to handle the product, has handled the product, that's key. And there's some trucks. I didn't even know that existed. So good. So anti-contamination measures for filling IBCs, drums, and cans. So what we found is the main contamination risks here are non-dedicated filling equipment, materials in contact with DF that are not compatible, whether it's hoses or gloves, returned IBCs that are either not cleaned, maybe they weren't reconditioned the right way, they had mixed with off-spec product or other product in it before, or filled in uncontrolled conditions. How do you solve against that, or what steps can you take? Dedicated filling equipment seems to make sense, but not all will do it. Drums and cans should always be one way. We don't advocate drums that are refillable. They can be done, and there's packaging out there, or I should say solutions out there, but typically I think most of we look at closed IBC solutions where you can do refilling in a closed environment to really protect the integrity of that product, protect the integrity of the tote, et cetera. And having good inspection procedures if a tote does come back, if there's anything that's loose, that's been if there's been a stamp on it or something that's been clipped on for making sure that it's not been broken into, so the seals, make sure those are inspected. How about for bulk? So our biggest things are non-dedicated transport vehicles. So we've seen people say, well, I had my fuel oil in there, can I just wash out and can I put diesel exhaust fluid in there? And for our purposes, we say, no, absolutely not. There are other products that are maybe less hazardous, like a UAN, urea ammonium nitrate. Through a rinsing process and a cleaning process, you usually can get a certification that that's been satisfactory to refill it with diesel exhaust fluid. But other materials that are cross-contaminated in the bulk process, you need to be very careful of. And that could be with a poly tank or stainless steel, et cetera. So our control measures use dedicated transport vehicles, which is hard in the beginning. And now as a distributor, maybe you will have some, but maybe some of your 30 parties won't, or they maybe don't handle the product regularly enough where they're going to have to mandate getting washouts. So we've talked about certificates of, if somebody comes to our station without a dedicated truck, we mandate certificates of cleaning and to understand what their last 3 products were. I think it's a very good, safe process to follow. And to inspect after loading, whether you're loading a truck or a rail car, check to see if there is anything that you see floating that doesn't look right. Maybe take some retention samples. I think it's one of your biggest insurance policies is to take a retained sample. So if your customer calls to you the next day and says, hey, I just got this product and it's off spec, I'll say, well, I can go back to trace it right back to the specification and the sample that I have to make sure that indeed I can verify that we had an on-spec sample before it went into your vehicle. So having that backup is security for you and insurance. And for dispensing equipment, so if you have non-dedicated equipment, if they're using lubricants in the same terminal, the same facility, make sure that they know that they use the dedicated pumps for the DEF. Maybe don't make sure that's not laying on the ground, of course, or they're laying in oil or dirt. It seems basic, but we've seen it. And just overall wrong filling or filling into the wrong tank. Control measures, dedicated equipment designed for DEF use. There's a lot of companies in the industry that can make sure that you do get that type of equipment. Closed IBC, we've talked about with dip tubes. It's been the best thing we've ever done. And at first we weren't sure, but we know that it's the best thing you could do because you can reuse your totes then and get the best economics and be safe. You can put up signs and warning your operators, or at least the fleets you can give them education. Warn your operators, make sure they know what they're doing. And I guess, and for the customer sites, making sure they know what their equipment is designed for. Sometimes you can make magnetic filling nozzles. A lot of times you'll see those on the trucks that are only discharge if it matches your pump access to the tank's access. Make sure they know the warning signs, have operating manuals, and that they do regular maintenance on all of their equipment. And with that, I did stay under my time, so I think we caught back up. And I really appreciate the time. It's fun, it's exciting. As I say, every day has been a new challenge in this marketplace for us. And we're looking really forward to being here in Mexico and continuing to grow with all of you. So thank you.
Okay. Yep, there's one question here in the front. So, yep, microphone's coming.
I don't know if I need the...
it's going to be in English.
Great job, Chad. Thank you. Just because it's current events, and I know this is going to sound like a shameless self-promotion, but one of the other things that we're seeing a lot in the industry in the U.S., and I'm privy to this because I'm currently kind of monitoring a group of industry individuals who are trying to revise API RP 1637.
Yep.
Is cross drops at the bulk locations.
Okay.
So it's been a big issue in the United States. I mean, I've gotten more than one example in the past month of people dumping their recreational vehicles into the DEF tanks at truck stops.
Really?
That sort of thing. So I think it's important to mention, it fits in with one of your slides, that proper labeling of the different things that can be at a distribution terminal or at a truck stop. I think it's important for Mexico to make sure that there's some sort of visual standard out there where they agree upon a color system. API does have a standard for that. It's RP 1637. But obviously I encourage them to take it upon themselves as well. So I just figured it was relevant to the conversation. So
I would say that's interesting too, and I know when you talk about cross drop, I thought you meant like maybe multiple producers dropping into the same tank, which is hard for you then to potentially determine who might be, if it is off spec, where it came from.
yeah,
Is that true? Is that true as well?
there's cross drops of everything. Now that we have biodiesels and many other sorts of fluids coming in by different times of night under different management perspective, things are happening that are out of control of some of the DEF suppliers. So
Right.
educating their customers to make sure they can properly identify for their deliveries where things need to go is of critical importance for
Yep.
DEF especially.
Good points. Good points.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, in this case, thanks,
Thank you.
Chad. You're coming back in half an
I'll
hour
be in
for
half- yeah.
for the panel anyway. Thank you.